Well, what if I told you that your matching napkins, your curated dinner playlist, and your newly renovated kitchen have absolutely nothing to do with biblical hospitality?
Yeah, that might shock a lot of people.
Right. I mean, in fact, they might actually be getting in the way.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are looking at a radical, cross-cultural display of one-sided grace.
It is messy. It requires sacrifice.
Yes, and it is aimed squarely at the stranger, not the friend. So our mission for this deep dive is to analyze a specific chapter from the book Biblical Missions, Principles, Priorities, and Practices.
Which is written by Mark Tatlock and Burnett.
Yeah, and the chapter we are focusing on is about imitating God's gracious invitation through the physical act of opening our homes. But, before we get into the practical applications for you, the listener, we really need to establish the theological lens for this entire conversation.
Absolutely, because if we get the theology wrong, the practice just devolves into a social club.
The only way to correctly view this topic is through the framework of historic Reformed theology. True biblical hospitality is a physical, tangible demonstration of the gospel itself.
So how do we tie that to, say, the Westminster Confession?
Well, think about the confession and its teaching on the natural state of mankind. In our natural state, we are totally depraved.
And we should clarify that does not mean we are as bad as we possibly could be.
Right, no. It means sin has corrupted every single part of our being. We are spiritually bankrupt.
Yeah, we have absolutely no ability to reciprocate God's mercy.
None at all. We could not earn our salvation. We cannot pay God back for it. And the Apostle Paul tells us in Romans 5 that we were actually enemies of God when Christ died for us.
We were hostile aliens.
Yes, because God extended unconditional, unmerited kindness to us when we were spiritual strangers. Well, believers are commanded to extend that exact same unmerited kindness to physical strangers in this world.
I love that. It is the gospel made visible right in your living room. But I think we all naturally default to a much more comfortable definition of having people over.
Oh, for sure.
The book actually clears the brush by deconstructing a few modern myths about what it means to open our homes. There is this massive misconception out there that hospitality is simply having your Christian friends over for a meal on a Friday night.
Right, which is great, but it is not the whole picture.
No, it is not. Now, 1 Peter 4.9 does command believers to be hospitable to one another, so fellowship within the body of Christ is necessary.
Yeah, we cannot neglect the saints.
But if we look closely at 1 Timothy 5.10 and Hebrews 13.2, the primary target of this biblical command is the stranger. It is aimed at the person who cannot repay the favor.
And that is the hard part.
I know I am guilty of this. It is so easy to text my best friends, throw some burgers on the grill, and just call it a day.
It is comfortable.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it is very easy. But having your friends over does not capture the radical, one-sided nature of the biblical command. Because your friends will probably just invite you over to their house the following weekend to return the favor.
Right. The transaction zeroes out.
Yeah, it becomes a mutual exchange.
And the theological danger of only hosting your friends is that it requires no reliance on God's grace. You already share an affinity with those people.
Yeah, you have the same worldview.
You have the same parenting styles, the same hobbies. It takes zero supernatural intervention to enjoy a meal with people you already like.
It's a staggering thought.
But there is an even more insidious trap modern believers fall into, and it is fueled entirely by social media aesthetics and commercial marketing.
Oh, the Instagram aesthetic.
Yes. We have completely warped our concept of the home, turning the dining room table into a stage for aesthetic performance. People feel this crushing burden to impress others with their culinary skills or their interior decorating.
So what is the core theological issue there?
The theological issue is that the picture-perfect myth shifts the focus entirely to self-promotion and pride. It makes the event about the homeowner receiving praise for their beautiful setup rather than humble care for someone in need.
Right.
When we worry about the presentation of the meal, we lose sight of the desperate condition of the person sitting across from us. It becomes a subtle form of idolatry where the host is worshiping their own image reflected in the eyes of their guests.
Wow. Modern entertaining really feels like a theatrical performance, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Send out the polished invitations, you dim the lights just right, you make sure the house is spotless.
And you want applause.
Right, when the curtain closes, you want a standing ovation from your peers. But biblical hospitality is much more like an emergency room triage.
I like that analogy.
In an emergency room, the lighting is harsh, the floors might get messy, and the people walking through the doors are, spiritually speaking, bleeding and broken. The doctors are not looking for a five-star review on their aesthetic choices. They are entirely focused on dispensing life-giving care to those in desperate need.
And that is what our homes are supposed to be.
And that brings up another major cultural assumption we need to dismantle. There is a pervasive idea, even within conservative churches, that managing the home and hosting guests is exclusively the domain of women.
Yeah, that is a huge problem. While wives and mothers certainly have a significant role in managing the home, delegating this entire command to women is a massive failure of male leadership.
Right, because Scripture addresses the men.
It is explicit about men leading their households. When we look at the requirements for male leadership in the church, managing the home and practicing this very specific command are inextricably linked.
You cannot separate them.
No, you cannot. A man cannot abdicate this responsibility to his wife and claim he is leading his family well. It requires a husband to actively initiate, to look for the outsider, and to invite them in.
He really sets the tone for the whole house.
Yes, he sets the tone for the entire family's attitude toward outsiders. If the husband treats his home like a private fortress meant only for his own relaxation after a long day at work, the rest of the family will adopt that exact same closed-door mentality.
So if we strip away these modern myths, that it is just for friends, that it must look perfect for social media, and that it is solely women's work, we're left with a very challenging original definition.
Very challenging.
Let us look at the ancient Greek text for a second. The Greek word used in the New Testament is philoxenia. It is a compound word.
Right.
The first part is philos, which means lover of or friend. The second part is xenos, which means strange or foreigner. So the literal translation is a lover of strangers or treating the unfamiliar as a guest.
And the historical context there is fascinating.
Yeah, the Evangelical Dictionary of Biblical Theology provides some amazing context for what a xenos actually was.
Yeah.
In the ancient world, an alien or a traveler lacked any tribal or national status.
They were totally unprotected.
Right. They did not have legal protection, they did not have a means to make a living, and they were desperate for immediate food and lodging. Plus, the roads were incredibly dangerous, just filled with bandits.
So, to practice philoxenia meant graciously receiving that alienated, vulnerable person into your own protection and providing for their physical survival out of your own pocket.
It was a matter of life and death.
Exactly. Well, it truly was. And we see the intensity of this command in Romans 12, verses 12 through 21.
What does Paul say there?
The Apostle Paul is writing to the church in Rome, and he places the command to pursue hospitality right between two really interesting statements. On one side, he says to contribute to the needs of the saints. On the other side, he says to bless those who persecute you.
Wow, right in the middle of those two extremes.
Yes. We must understand the context of the Roman Church. They were experiencing severe affliction from their pagan neighbors. They were living in the shadow of Nero's eventual madness.
Yeah, it was a terrifying time.
They were being targeted, mocked, and physically abused for refusing to worship the emperor. Yet Paul commands them to overcome evil with good by opening their literal homes and sharing their literal food with the very people who were persecuting them.
That is just radical.
It brings us right back to the doctrine of total depravity. We were enemies of God. The one-sidedness of loving an enemy stranger, looking at someone who wishes you harm, and deciding to bring them into your home for a meal is the ultimate physical picture of the gospel.
You are offering them physical grace when they deserve your wrath.
Yes, just as God offered us spiritual grace when we deserved his wrath.
Okay, wait, I need to push back on that for a second.
Sure.
If we apply that directly to a modern believer, reading that you should invite persecutors or hostile strangers into your house sounds completely reckless.
It does sound that way to our modern ears.
Right. I mean, how do you reconcile the very real, God-given responsibility to protect the physical safety of your family, specifically your children, with this radical command to invite potentially hostile strangers into your private sanctuary?
That is a very valid concern.
That feels like a massive contradiction to me. If my first duty is to provide for and protect my household, opening the front door to someone who is an enemy of the faith seems like I am intentionally putting my family in harm's way.
The resolution comes from shifting our focus regarding our true identity.
Okay, how so?
The reason we feel that tension is because we view our homes as permanent fortresses that we must defend at all costs. But Scripture tells us we are not permanent residents of this earth. We are exiles ourselves.
Right.
1 Peter describes believers in Asia Minor as scattered exiles. Philippians 3.20 tells us that our citizenship is in heaven.
So we have a completely different home country.
Yes. Think about the Reformed doctrine of the perseverance of the saints. God's irresistible grace guarantees our eternal inheritance. It cannot be lost, stolen, or destroyed.
It's entirely secure.
Because our eternal home is completely secure, we are freed from clinging tightly to our earthly homes. We can open our doors generously because the worst thing an enemy could do to us on earth cannot touch our eternal inheritance.
That is a huge perspective shift.
We treat other earthly aliens mercifully because we recognize that we are merely aliens passing through, completely dependent on the mercy of God. We are not owners of our property. We are stewards of resources that belong to the king.
So if my home is not my permanent castle, then I should view it like an embassy.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Yeah, if you are an ambassador living in a foreign country, you do not own the embassy building. That property is sovereign soil belonging to your home country.
Right.
Believers' homes are foreign embassies of the kingdom of heaven, stationed temporarily on earth. And the purpose of an embassy is not to be a private country club for the ambassador's friends.
No, it is designed to process refugees.
Yes. When a stranger walks through your front door, they are stepping onto the sovereign soil of the kingdom, and your job as the ambassador is to grant them asylum by sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ.
It completely changes how you look at your living room furniture.
It really does. It is no longer just a place to watch television. It is an outpost for foreign relations.
And that embassy mindset is precisely why this requirement is so strict for church leadership.
In the pastoral epistles, right?
Yes. In 1 Timothy 3.2 and Titus 1.7 through 8, the qualifications for elders explicitly mandate that male leaders in the church must be hospitable.
It is not optional.
Not at all. Alexander Strauch wrote an entire book on this called The Hospitality Commands, and he points out how frequently elder boards completely neglect this qualification.
Oh, totally. They look for men who are good public speakers or sharp businessmen.
Right, or guys who can balance a church budget, but they ignore whether the man actually opens his home to strangers.
Which is wild because it is right there in the text.
In Titus 1, Paul connects being hospitable with being the opposite of self-willed or fond of dishonest gain.
How do those connect?
Well, a self-willed man hoards his resources for his own comfort. A man who loves dishonest gain views everything through the lens of what benefits him financially.
Ah, I see.
But a man who understands his identity as a sojourner, whose inheritance is kept in heaven, gives freely of his time and his groceries without calculating the return on investment. If a man cannot shepherd the strangers who walk up to his front door, he has no business trying to shepherd the flock of God.
You know, running an embassy requires giving away your resources without expecting any payment, which directly challenges the modern economic mindset.
It absolutely does.
Our whole culture is built on transactions. I give you something, you give me something of equal value back. But the economics of grace operate completely upside down.
John Calvin actually wrote extensively about this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he lamented the demise of ancient hospitality and pointed a finger directly at the rise of the secular industry in Europe.
That is fascinating.
Calvin noted that the church was increasingly relying on public lodgings and taverns to take care of travelers instead of opening their own doors. He saw the outsourcing of this duty as a tragic loss of Christian witness.
It makes sense.
When the church started saying, there is an inn down the road, go pay for a bed there, instead of saying, come sleep in my spare room, the watching world lost a massive, tangible picture of the free grace of God.
We just handed it over to a business.
Yes, and we see the scriptural foundation for Calvin's lament in Luke 14, verses 12 through 14.
Jesus talking about who to invite to dinner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, Jesus gives a direct command to invite people to your table who have absolutely no means to repay you. He specifically lists the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind.
And he tells his followers that their reward will come at the resurrection of the righteous, not in this life.
We also see this in Luke 10 with the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan acts as a host on the side of a dangerous road.
He pays out of his own pocket to care for an enemy stranger, a Jewish man who despised Samaritans.
And he expects nothing in return. Furthermore, in James 2, we see a harsh condemnation of favoritism. James blasts the church for giving the rich man with a gold ring a prime seat while dismissing the poor man in dirty clothes.
Which is such a common temptation.
It is, but the theological reason behind this condemnation is tied directly to the Reformed doctrine of unconditional election.
How so?
Acts 10.34 says God is no respecter of persons. God did not look down the corridors of time, see human wealth, status, or merit, and choose to save people based on those attributes. He chose his elect unconditionally.
Right.
Therefore, since God does not show partiality when granting eternal salvation, the local church commits a grievous sin when it shows partiality in how it treats guests.
It makes me wonder, has the sheer convenience of the modern hospitality industry, multi-billion-dollar hotel chains, tourism boards, endless restaurants, and food delivery apps, has it subtly commodified our interactions?
I think it absolutely has.
We have essentially outsourced our biblical duty to the Holiday Inn. The convenience of simply paying for a hotel room or taking someone to a loud restaurant has robbed the local church of its primary method of demonstrating a free, unmerited gospel.
It is a massive loss.
Think about the difference for a second. If I buy you a meal at a restaurant, the waitress serves us, the busboy cleans up the mess, and I just swipe my credit card.
It is a financial transaction.
Right. I get to leave the mess behind and go back to my clean, private home. But if I bring you into my messy home, I am cooking for you, I am cleaning up after you, you are seeing my life unedited, and I am opening up my personal sanctuary to you.
One is a transaction, the other is a sacrifice.
Yes, absolutely.
And the convenience of the modern industry has absolutely commodified our relationships.
Yeah.
It allows us to keep people at arm's length. We can fulfill a social obligation without ever letting someone see our actual lives.
So how do we fix it?
Reversing this trend does not start with a massive church program. It starts in the daily, practical rhythms of the individual household. This is especially true for those on the front lines of ministry.
The book touches on this, doesn't it?
Yes, it includes some fascinating insights from Shelby Cullen, who interviewed several missionary wives about the reality of practicing this command in difficult contexts. One of those wives is named Ava, who ministers in Southeast Asia.
I remember reading her section.
Ava gives a brilliant piece of advice to anyone considering foreign missions. She says, do not wait until you go overseas to start opening your home.
I read that quote from Ava, and it stopped me in my tracks.
It is very convicting.
She points out that if a person will not converse with strangers at their local grocery store, or if they refuse to open their home to difficult people in their own neighborhood right now, they are not going to magically start doing it once their boots touch the ground on the mission field.
No, geography does not change your heart.
It is a physical muscle. If you do not use it, it atrophies. You cannot expect to run a cross-cultural marathon in a foreign country if you have not been jogging around your own cul-de-sac by hosting the people living right next door to you.
We tend to romanticize foreign missions, thinking that a plane ride over the ocean will suddenly turn us into bold, hospitable evangelists.
But it just doesn't work that way.
No. We also have the perspective of Nina, a missionary wife in Eastern Europe.
What was her approach?
Nina shares her practical strategy of using cooking as a gateway to gospel ministry. She admits she was not a great cook initially, but she learned to improvise out of necessity.
You just had to figure it out.
Right. She started hosting pastoral students twice a week, and she made it a rule to always keep homemade desserts ready for uninvited drop-in guests.
That takes a lot of flexibility.
And what is truly remarkable about Nina's approach is her theology of providence.
How does providence tie into unexpected guests?
She talks about the sudden reconfigurations of a meal, having extra people show up unannounced, or plans changing at the last minute. Instead of viewing these moments as frustrating interruptions to her carefully planned schedule, she learned to welcome them as God's divine providence.
Wow, so she saw God's hand in the doorbell ringing.
Yes, she recognized that the sovereign God of the universe orchestrated that specific person to knock on her door at that exact moment so she could minister to them. She submitted her daily schedule to the absolute sovereignty of God.
That is just beautiful. Ava's advice combats the pragmatic mindset of waiting for the perfect time to obey biblical commands. And Nina's advice combats the idol of our own schedules.
They both hit on our biggest weaknesses.
This really forces us to pivot our thinking. We spend massive amounts of time preparing people to go to the foreign mission field, which is vital and necessary. But we often fail to recognize that God, in His absolute sovereignty, is already moving the foreign mission field directly into our own backyards.
We do not always have to cross an ocean to find the stranger.
Right.
Mark D. Rentz covers this phenomenon of global mobility extensively in the book. From a human perspective, people move around the globe for a variety of reasons.
Natural disasters, war, economic opportunity.
Or higher education. But we must look at this through the lens of God's absolute sovereignty. Acts 17.26 states explicitly that God decrees the appointed times and the boundaries of human habitation.
He is in control of all of it.
God determines when and where every single human being will live. He sets the borders. Rentz points out that throughout Scripture, God frequently meets people while they are in motion.
Yeah, we see Jesus traveling and meeting the woman at the well.
We see Hagar fleeing into exile in the wilderness. We see Jacob running for his life. God orchestrates human migration for his own redemptive purposes.
So when we see immigration shifts, we should look closer.
Yes. When we see a massive influx of immigrants or international students, we should not view it merely as a geopolitical event. We should view it as a sovereign orchestration of God to bring the unreached nations into contact with the local church.
Rentz provides a stunning case study of this from Tempe, Arizona, which is the home of Arizona State University.
Yes, the numbers there are incredible.
In 1930, Tempe was a tiny town of just 2,495 people. But by the year 2020, that university grew to host over 13,000 international students.
That is a massive demographic shift.
And what is staggering is that a huge portion of these students come from the restricted access 1040 window.
You should probably explain that term for the listeners.
Oh, right. For those who might not know the logistics of that term, the 1040 window refers to the rectangular geographic area from 10 degrees north to 40 degrees north latitude across North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia.
These are highly restricted areas.
Yeah, these are countries where missionaries are legally banned, where preaching the gospel can get you thrown in prison or executed, and where the population has virtually zero access to a local visible church.
And yet
God sovereignly orchestrated it so that thousands of students from those exact restricted nations would pack their bags, secure visas, and move to an American suburb.
the strategic brilliance of God's providence here is just awe-inspiring. He placed local churches in specific university cities to reach the nations without those church members ever needing a passport or a smuggling route.
It is all right there.
The local believers in Tempe recognized this sovereign opportunity and took action. Starting back in 1973, a couple opened a Christian bookstore near the campus to engage students.
They saw the need early on.
They did. They started doing airport pickups for confused, exhausted international students. Think about the logistics and the awkwardness of that.
It sounds incredibly intimidating.
You are driving to an airport to pick up a student who barely speaks your language, who is disoriented, and you are loading their bags into your car and driving them to a dorm. It is incredibly vulnerable.
And they did more than just airport pickups, right?
The church also began hosting English as a second language classes. They created conversation partner programs so foreign students could practice their English with believers in a safe environment.
That builds immediate relationship.
And perhaps most crucially, they ran a Monday morning prayer group specifically pleading for these international students for 7 consecutive years. They saw the nations arriving in their city, and they mobilized their homes, their vehicles, and their time to meet them.
It makes me ask a hard question. Are modern evangelical churches guilty of overcomplicating global missions?
That is a tough question, but a necessary one.
We spend massive amounts of money, time, and logistical energy hyper-focusing on expensive, short-term overseas trips. We will fly a youth group of teenagers across the world for a week to paint a cinder block wall or run a vacation Bible school, and we will applaud that as great mission work.
Which is not necessarily bad in itself.
No, it is not bad, but at the same time, we completely ignore the restricted access nations that God has sovereignly placed in the university dormitories just 10 miles down the road.
It is a massive blind spot.
It really is. We will fundraise thousands of dollars to go to a country, but we won't drive a student from that same country to the grocery store or invite them to our dining room table for a holiday meal. It is almost as if we prefer the romanticized, short-term adventure of foreign travel over the long-term, messy reality of loving the foreigner who lives in our own zip code.
It is a glaring inconsistency in our modern church culture. When we actually align our daily lives with God's sovereign geography, the results are incredible.
We have another case study to look at regarding that.
We do. We see this beautifully illustrated in a case study from Devraj Urs. Devraj recounts his experience ministering in Davao City, which is in the Philippines.
Specifically at a medical school.
Yes, at the Davao Medical School Foundation. This medical school has an enormous population of Indian students, mostly ranging from 17 to 24 years old.
That is so young to be that far from home.
It is. You have thousands of young people who are extremely far from home, living in a radically different culture, dealing with the intense pressure of medical school, and they are lonely.
And hungry.
Yes, on a very practical level, they are craving familiar Indian food.
So Devraj and a local pastor named Philip saw this massive demographic of lonely, displaced students and took action.
They kept it very simple.
They started a simple Saturday Bible study. It drew 20 to 30 teenagers at a time, and many of these students came from entirely non-Christian backgrounds,
They showed up initially just for the cultural familiarity and the food.
which makes total sense. Imagine being a 19-year-old student in a foreign country, stressed about exams, and someone offers you a home-cooked meal that tastes like your mother's cooking back in India.
That physical provision opened the door for genuine discipleship.
It really did. That Bible study eventually led to a radio broadcast ministry, and most significantly, it led to the salvation of several of these Indian students. They heard the true gospel of grace, perhaps for the very first time in their lives, because someone offered them a meal and a place to belong.
However, DeVraj notes a massive challenge that arises from this success.
What happens when they graduate?
That is the issue. When these newly converted students finish their medical degrees and return to India, they struggle immensely to find solid, theologically sound local churches.
Because the options are so limited there.
Yes. In many of their hometowns, the only options are pragmatic congregations with weak doctrine or highly charismatic groups that stray far from biblical orthodoxy.
And these students know the difference now.
Because these students were trained in sound Reformed doctrine during their time in the Philippines, they developed sharp discernment skills. They can recognize false teaching.
That has to be heartbreaking for them.
DeVraj says many of them literally weep over the phone to him because they lack true Orthodox fellowship in their home country. This highlights the critical necessity of the local church in the life of a believer. You cannot sustain a robust Christian life in isolation.
That challenge brings up a vital analogy. Doing campus evangelism without intentionally plugging the new believer into a solid, confession-holding local church is like taking a branch from a tree, successfully grafting it onto a new life-giving vine, but then randomly ripping it off and throwing it on the grass, expecting it to flourish.
It just will not survive.
Right. If you cut a clipping and secure a conversion, but you just leave it on the lawn instead of permanently grafting it into the trunk of the local church, it withers. It explains the biology of spiritual growth.
The local church is the root system that feeds the branch.
Exactly. Yes, that is right. We cannot just secure a conversion at a campus ministry and walk away. We must integrate them into the body of Christ so they can survive the theological droughts they will face back home.
And you know, the local Filipino church in Davao City had to learn a lesson about integration as well.
They were hesitant at first.
Initially, many of the local Filipino church members thought they could not reach the Indian students because of the ethnic and cultural barrier.
They thought it was too wide of a gap.
They assumed they needed specialized training, a shared language, or a similar background to be effective. But they soon realized that ethnicity makes no difference when it comes to the universal language of grace.
Food and kindness are pretty universal.
Yes. Any believer, regardless of their cultural background, can offer a free meal, ask good questions, and build a relationship. The Filipino doctors in the church started hosting the Indian medical students, proving that the body of Christ transcends all earthly borders. They recognize that the gospel shatters ethnic dividing walls.
And the strategic opportunity these specific students possess is staggering. In India, doctors sit at the absolute top of the social ladder.
They are highly revered.
They command immense respect. This gives them unprecedented access to share the gospel with patients of all different religious backgrounds.
People listen to their doctors.
A patient is often incredibly open to listening to the spiritual counsel of the doctor who just healed their physical ailment. By reaching these students in the Philippines, the church is effectively sending highly respected, self-funded medical missionaries back into the heart of India.
It circumvents the entire visa process.
Yes. A traditional Western missionary might never get a visa to preach in those areas, but an Indian doctor returning home has unrestricted access to the most vulnerable people in his own society.
It is a phenomenal strategy ordained by God's providence. It perfectly encapsulates everything we have discussed today.
It really does.
To summarize our core thesis for everyone listening, biblical hospitality is not about elegant table settings, and it is not about rotating dinners with your established social circle.
It is much heavier than that.
It is a costly, one-sided extension of grace to the stranger, the enemy, and the sojourner. It acts as a physical mirror of the gospel. Because God elected us unconditionally and saved us when we were his enemies, we open our doors to the physical enemies and strangers of this world, expecting absolutely nothing in return. I challenge you to look at your own dining room table differently after today. It is not just a piece of furniture. It is a theological tool to reach the nations God has sovereignly placed right in your zip code.
That is a weighty challenge. Think about your own dining room table right now. Is it just a piece of wooden furniture where you eat your cereal? Or could it be an embassy desk meant to reach the nations? And I want to leave you with one final thought. What if the next great historical awakening does not begin with a famous preacher in a massive stadium? What if it begins quietly at a modest kitchen table, where a believer shares a simple, improvised meal with a foreign stranger who hears about the unconditional grace of Christ for the very first time? Think about that as you look at the strangers in your own neighborhood this week. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive on Reformed thinking.